Order, please, order. Before we start the orders of the day and daily routine, I'd like to remind all members here today, it's 1 year anniversary of our hire of our clerk, Annette Boucher, today. Congratulations. The topic for late debate has been chosen, and the subject is, therefore be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation on 75 years of excellence in journalism, capturing historic Canadian moments and shaping the culture of this country and this province. Submitted by the Honourable Member for Glace Bay. Daily routine, presenting and reading petitions. Presenting reports of committees. The Honourable Member for Kings North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, may I have your permission to table a report, the annual report on the Standing Committee on Community Services for 2011. And while I'm on my feet, I'd like to just take a moment to thank the members of the committee on both sides of the House for their engagement in the work, for their hard work, and in fact for their civility. It's a good committee to work with. And I would very much like to thank Kim Langell, who I know is in the East Gallery this afternoon, the clerk of the committee, and all the members of the committee's office staff for doing a whole range of things to make sure that the committee's process works smoothly. So thank you very much.
The report is tabled. The Honourable Member for Colchester, Musquodoboit Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm, as the chair of the Standing Committee on Veterans Affairs, I'm pleased to submit the annual report of the committee for the year September 2010 to August 2011. And in submitting the annual report, I want to just say a word of gratitude also to the committee staff and Kim Langell, the clerk, for their support of the committee's work over the year, but also to all the members of the committee, especially, I might say, during this Remembrance Week. I'd like to express gratitude to all members of the committee from all parties in the House for the unanimity with which now for the second year they have, through the committee, pressed the federal government on the position of the necessity to end the benefit annuity reduction clawback of members of the Canadian Forces and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. So with that, I'd like to submit the report. Thank you.
Thank you. The report is tabled. Statements by ministers. The Honourable Minister of Communities, Culture and Heritage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today, Nova Scotians have a new way to make their voices heard. The Nova Scotia Online Forum is an easy way for citizens from all walks of life to provide opinions and advice directly to government. Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotians have a lot of great ideas. They have a lot to say about the future of our province. Traditional models of public consultation are very useful, but they lack the breadth to reach the grassroots and garner widespread input. We hope to recruit thousands of Nova Scotians to this new forum. The Nova Scotia Online Forum uses the technology that hundreds of thousands of Nova Scotians already use on a daily basis. We're counting on the wisdom of Nova Scotians to help us tackle the challenges and opportunities we face as a government, improving health care, growing our economy, ensuring government lives within its means. In fact, my colleague, the Minister of Finance, is already planning to use the online forum as part of this year's pre-budget consultation. Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotia is the first province in Canada to launch such a program. We'll be able to solicit feedback more quickly and at a lower cost with the online forum than with regular random sampling surveys because participants will already be recruited. It's available now at www.forumns.ca. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask all members of the House to encourage everyone they know to join the online forum. We believe that Nova Scotians should have as much opportunity as possible to tell their government what they think and to help build a better future for our province. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Digby Annapolis.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure to rise and offer a few words in response to the minister's statement. I'd like to start by saying thank you to the Minister of Community, Culture and Heritage for giving us an advanced copy of his remarks. Mr. Speaker, new forms of technology are an excellent way of communicating in this world. The creation of the Nova Scotia Online Forum will be a good avenue for people of our province to offer their concerns, suggestions, and ideas to government. As the Minister already stated, the Online Forum makes use of technology that hundreds of thousands of Nova Scotians are already using every day. Mr. Speaker, it is good that Nova Scotia is the first province in Canada to launch such a program. However, I will say that it is odd that this government is moving forward with a method collecting information online when they have refused the Liberal caucus initiative in the past to allow online petitions to be tabled in this House of Assembly. This initiative has been called for repeatedly by my colleague and the member of Halifax Clayton Park. Mr. Speaker, online petitions are effective because of their capability to gather large numbers of signatures in a fast and efficient manner. Yet the previous Conservative government and the current NDP government refused this form of accessible public engagement, and we don't understand why. Mr. Speaker, I would like to urge the Minister and his government to review this initiative once again in light of this announcement today. Thank you very much.
The honourable member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Minister for providing a copy of his statement to me in advance. Mr. Speaker, when I was listening to the Minister deliver a statement, it sounded familiar. The mandate of this new online forum sounds similar to a program this government eliminated in the spring. Voluntary planning provided government with the ability to reach out to communities across Nova Scotia. It was accountable. If you wanted to be a member, you had to go through an appointment process. The process helped ensure that a government couldn't stack it full of their friends and insiders. I'm concerned that with the online forum, that's exactly what we're going to see happen. After all, the NDP said they were eliminating voluntary planning because it didn't align with government thinking. So are they expecting the online forum will? Or what will happen when this online forum gives them results they don't like? Voluntary planning was a success. I think with the creation of this online forum, the NDP have finally acknowledged they shouldn't have eliminated. With those few words, Mr. Speaker, I'll take my seat. Thank you.
Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to take this opportunity to talk about some good news announced earlier today. Good news that will help make life better for Nova Scotia families caring for a child with a disability. Good news that clearly shows our commitment to improve services for persons with disabilities and their families. Mr. Speaker, more families caring for a child with a disability will soon have help because we are expanding income eligibility guidelines for the Direct Family Support for Children program. Starting next month, the amount a family of 5, for example, can make and be eligible for the Direct Family Support for Children program will increase to $72,000 after taxes. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to table a copy of the news release that was distributed a couple of hours ago. For over 30 years, this program has helped families in our province with costs for things like transportation, medication, and most importantly, respite, when families need some extra help and support. This government is ensuring that it will continue to help even more families in the future. Supporting Nova Scotians who need it most is a priority of this government. 80 more families will now have access to this program and the help it offers. Many of them are middle-income families dealing with the uniqueness of raising a child or children with a disability. Mr. Speaker, this means that nearly 900 Nova Scotia families will have the benefit of this program that offers them support they rely on. Any parent can appreciate the need for an extra bit of help or for a break from the day-to-day of raising children. That extra help can be even more important for families caring for a child with a disability. This government is maximizing the impact of this investment to ensure it goes as far as possible to make life better for Nova Scotia families caring for a child with a disability. Earlier this year, I was with the Premier when he unveiled the province's Autism Spectrum Disorder Action Plan. Part of that plan was to improve the direct family support for children program so that more families would have access to things like medications, transportation, and respite. Mr. Speaker, today's news is that improvement. Today's news is another example of this government keeping its commitment to make life better for Nova Scotia families. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Halifax-Clayton Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'd like to thank the Minister first for making her comments available to us earlier today. And it's my pleasure to rise and have a few comments in response to the ministerial statement about support for families of children with disabilities. Mr. Speaker, I think the news is very good. Whenever you can improve the accessibility of programs to people who desperately need them, it is a good news story for Nova Scotians. My understanding is the department estimates about 80 more families will be able to get services with this new income level, and I think that that is good news and certainly something that we very much support. Every member of the legislature, I know, has had calls from their constituents and looked at the income levels and looked to see if there were programs available that could help. And at $72,000 for a family income, that is becoming more accessible. We know it seems like a lot of money, but for families today, that's, there are still a lot of expenses. And if you're caring for a disabled child or, or a severely disabled child, it can be very expensive as well. There's often additional medical costs, maybe special feeding, food or feeding supplies. There can be other medical equipment and supplies that they need to buy that are extra. I think they are covered under this support as well. And certainly the cost of respite care is very expensive for individuals to access, and having some support makes a huge difference. One thing the Liberal Party has always stood for in all of the elections that I've been involved with and followed in the past has been programs that support people staying at home and staying in their communities, and programs that support loved ones looking after their own family, which they so much want to do. And sometimes financially, it's just not possible. And so we very much support these programs. And one comment I would ask is that when I looked at the policy online, the policy is for children under 19 years of age. And there's another policy that's sort of wrapped into the same one, which is for children over 19. And I'm hoping that the minister will look at those families that are caring for their loved ones that have gone beyond the age of being children, but still need that family care and still are never going to be able to look after themselves. And again, it ties in with keeping them at home for as long as we can, giving the support to sometimes elderly parents or as they're aging parents to continue to look after their children. So with that, Mr. Speaker, we certainly do support this as a step in the right direction and making services more available to more Nova Scotians, which is a good thing. Thank you.
The honourable member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you once again, Mr. Speaker, and again, thank you to the Minister for providing a copy of her statement to me in advance. Mr. Speaker, it gives me pleasure as well to rise and speak on the ministerial statement. Families caring for a child with a disability are in a unique, difficult circumstance. This change in income threshold is positive news for those that rely on family support programs. It means that some struggling families are now able to provide needed medications, transportation, and care for their children. I'll be interested in speaking with the Minister later, Mr. Speaker, to discuss some of the details. The Department press release the Minister tabled states, and I quote, "The amount of assistance a family receives varies depending on their income, assessed need of respite, and family size." And I'd like to know how this will practically impact these additional 80 families, for instance. The example used, a family could make up to $72,000 after tax. That's for a family of 5. What's the change for a family of 3, 2 parents and 1 child, or a single parent with 2 children? This is a good step, but our caucus will be looking for feedback to ensure the program expansion is helping in the way it is intended. And I thank the Minister, and I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Government notices of motion. The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Homebridge Youth Society of Dartmouth has been honoured as the winner of the 7th Annual Maritime Business Ethics Awards in the nonprofit category, and whereas the Maritime Business Ethic Awards celebrate organizations that go above and beyond to do what is right and fair without question and without compromise. And whereas for more than 25 years, the Homebridge Youth Society has served vulnerable youth in Nova Scotia with a vision of all youth and families living together in health, safety, and harmony. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House recognize the valuable contribution that Homebridge Youth Society has made and continues to make on behalf of our youth. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas November is Crohn's and Colitis Awareness Month, and whereas Canada has among the highest rates of Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis in the world, and Nova Scotia has the highest rates of these diseases in the country, and whereas 200,000 Canadians suffer from these inflammatory bowel diseases that have no cause, no cure, and limited public understanding. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly join me in recognizing November as Crohn's and Colitis Awareness Month and commend the organizations that support the sufferers in their efforts to raise awareness and find a cure. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, before I read my resolution, I beg leave to make a very brief introduction.
Most certainly.
Thank you. With us today, Mr. Speaker, I'm very, very pleased to say that I've got somebody that has been a very, very dear friend of mine for maybe the last 20 years, and certainly I'm going to acknowledge him in my resolution, but I know that it was probably 16 years ago in Washington that this gentleman and I were walking along a street, and I think whispered in his ear, BBI. And I think this will all come to light after I read the resolutions. But I would like to ask Mr. Rustam Southwell to stand and get a warm welcome from the House, Mr. Speaker.
We welcome all our visitors to the gallery and hope they enjoyed today's proceedings. I will now recognize the Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day, I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Rustum Southwell was the founding executive director of the Black Business Initiative, it has faithfully served the organization since 1996, helping to develop a dynamic and vibrant Black presence within the Nova Scotia business community. And whereas through training, loans, investments, and other support, the BBI has helped create more than 600 jobs and contributed to a rate of growth among African Nova Scotian businesses that was more than 50 times the provincial rate of growth, according to Statistics Canada figures from 2001 to 2006. And whereas, after more than 15 years of dedicated service to the BBI, Mr. Southwell will retire from his current position as Chief Executive Officer early in 2012. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the House join me in thanking Rustum Southwell for his vision and dedication in supporting African Nova Scotian entrepreneurs and growing Nova Scotia's economy, and to wish him well in all of his future endeavors. Mr. Speaker, I ask for a waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of African Nova Scotia Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day, I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Bay of Fundy campaign to become one of the global new 7 wonders of nature has reached out to Nova Scotians, Canadians, and people from around the world, generating awareness and millions of votes for our beautiful bay. And whereas the Bay of Fundy is Canada's only finalist among 28 international competitors remaining in the contest, chosen from more than 440 original entries, and whereas a win for the Bay would have huge significance for Canada and Nova Scotia on a global scale, making it one of the best-known destinations in the world. Therefore, be it resolved that in these final days of the campaign, that all members of the House encourage Nova Scotians and all Canadians to go to votemyfunday.com and vote for the Bay before the final voting deadline of November the 11th. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. Introduction of bills. The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I make an introduction before I begin my introduction?
Oh, certainly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the West Gallery today, I would like to introduce to all members of the House Amelia DeMarco and Jessica Simmons from the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, and I encourage you to ask everyone to welcome them here today.
We welcome all our guests to the gallery and hope that they enjoyed today's proceedings. I will now recognize the Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2010, the Finance Act, respecting intergenerational reporting.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2010, the Finance Act, respecting intergenerational reporting.
Bill number 82, an act to amend Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2010, the Finance Act, respecting intergenerational reporting.
Order the bill be read a second time on a future day. The honourable member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill titled An Act to Amend Chapter 4 of the Acts of 2004, the Health Protection Act, to establish health and safety standards for the tattoo industry.
The honourable member for Kings West begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 4 of the Acts of 2004, the Health Protection Act, to establish health and safety standards for the tattoo industry.
Bill number 83, an act to amend Chapter 4 of the Acts of 2004, the Health Protection Act, to establish health and safety standards for the tattoo industry.
Order the bill be read a second time on a future day. The honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 33 of the Acts of 2008, the Animal Protection Act.
The honourable Minister of Agriculture begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 33 of the Acts of 2008, the Animal Protection Act.
Bill number 84, an act to amend Chapter 33 of the Acts of 2008, the Animal Protection Act.
Order the bill be read a second time on a future day. The honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 7 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Agriculture and Rural Credit Act.
The honourable Minister for Agriculture begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 7 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Agricultural and Rural Credit Act.
Bill number 85, an act to amend Chapter 7 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Agriculture and Rural Credit Act.
Order the bill be read a second time on a future day. Notices of motion. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day. I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Black Business Initiative, established in 1996 to promote the growth of businesses owned by members of the Nova Scotia Black community, celebrated its 15th anniversary this year. And whereas although the success of this organization be credited to the hard work and dedication of the entire team, it is especially true of Chief Executive Officer Rustum Southwell. And whereas after 15 years with the Black Business Initiative, seeing it exceed the expectations in job creation and financial investment, Mr. Southwell will be easing into retirement with a sense of accomplishment. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of the House of Assembly congratulate Rustum Southwell and the Black Business Initiative on their 15 years of success and wish Mr. Southwell a happy and enjoyable retirement. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day, I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on October 24th, Constable Justin McNeil of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and the son of Jerry and Judy McNeil of Little Narrows was presented with the Royal Canadian Humane Association Medal for Bravery. And whereas Justin received the medal because he rescued an 18-year-old whose snowmobile plunged through the ice on the Churchill River in northern Saskatchewan. And whereas Constable McNeil was one of 13 individuals presented with bronze and silver medals for acts of bravery, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate Justin on his award and commend him for the bravery he exhibited and wish him further success in his policing career. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Shubenacadie Canal, since its formal construction began in 1826, has been of vital historic importance to all Nova Scotians. And whereas Dr. John Jake O'Connor stepped down as Canal Commission President and Chair as of June 20th, 2011 after a 5-year tenure. And whereas Dr. O'Connor raised the profile of the Shubenacadie Canal Commission immensely during his term and is committed to raising $750,000 towards the future restoration of both the canal and the marine railway. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the House of Assembly join me in congratulating Dr. O'Connor on his long-standing commitment to the Shubenacadie Canal Commission and wish him many more years as an advocate for this community. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cape Breton North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future date I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on October 20th at the Membertou Trade and Convention Centre, the Sydney and Area Chamber of Commerce presented its Excellence in Business Awards for 2011. And whereas 375 guests attended the awards banquet, where 258 businesses were nominated for 22 awards, and whereas the award for accommodation, Hotel Motel, was awarded to the Clansman Motel of North Sydney. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate Sandra Allen Simic and her staff on winning the 2011 Excellence in Business Award and wish them continued success. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. Honourable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on September 29th, 6 community leaders from across Nova Scotia were recognized at the 2011 Celebrating Communities Conference and Award Ceremony in Yarmouth. And whereas one of those recognized was a young constituent of mine by the name of Aaron Stevens, and whereas Aaron received the Excellence in Youth Leadership Award for his work with the Gay Straight Alliance to ensure lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender youth feel happy and safe in their communities. Therefore, be it resolved, members of this House congratulate Aaron Stevens and all the community leaders for their efforts to make Nova Scotia a safer, happier, and better place to live, work, and raise a family. And Mr. Speaker, I would request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Colchester North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Lieutenant Colonel Peter C. Earl from Tatamagouche, Colchester North, graduated from the Royal Military College of Canada in 1992 with a degree in mechanical engineering and has had a very impressive military career. And whereas Earl has been deployed to a number of places, including Norway, Scotland, Greenland, Sicily, has served in many command positions, has amassed more than 800 hours of flight test, and has flown in excess of 60 different types of aircraft. And whereas Earl has served as a aircraft maintenance officer, aircraft engineering officer, weapons system manager, and senior engineer designer, therefore be it resolved, all members of the House of Assembly extend congratulations to Lieutenant Colonel Peter Earl, who took command of 16 Wing Borden, the largest training wing in the Canadian Armed Forces, with 400 staff and 1,100 students. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future date I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas with her horses Robbie Bell, Just a Dandy, and Comet's Enhancement, 15-year-old Rebecca McKeegan recently competed in New Brunswick Morgan Horse Show in Sussex. And whereas Rebecca also won many of her classes, earning her the title of Junior Champion Exhibitor. And whereas Rebecca also won the Canadian Morgan Horse Youth Challenge for the 2nd year running. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate Rebecca on her impressive show season and wish her every success in her future competitions. And Mr. Speaker, I would request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Halifax Citadel, Sable Island.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Atlantic Jewish Council has been observing Holocaust Education Week since 2004, with ceremonies in Halifax, Sydney, and Moncton organized to remember the millions of people who lost their lives in the Holocaust and to help ensure that an atrocity of this magnitude will never happen again. And whereas this year, Holocaust Education Week runs from October 24th to November 9th with memorials and events including films, survivor testimony, and talks from authors, photographers, and theologians. And whereas this year, November 9th, Dignity Day, which marks the 73rd anniversary of Kristallnacht, will be commemorated in Halifax at the Grand Parade by university students, school-aged children, and members of the community at large, committing themselves to respect diversity and the fundamental rights of all individuals and groups. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly thanks the Atlantic Jewish Council, Edna Levine, and the Holocaust Education Week Committee for reminding us of our obligations to each other and for helping to create a more just and peaceful world. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Joanne Bernard, as Executive Director of Alice House, has expanded to programs and services concerning children in crisis who have witnessed violence in the home and was architect of the Healing and Bruises program, thereby improving in-house child youth support services and positive outcomes for families. Rather than Alice House receiving multiple national awards from the Donner Foundation and the Better Business Bureau Ethics Award for the nonprofit community. And whereas Joanne was a project developer for Marguerite Centre, the long-term residential facility for women recovering from addictions in Nova Scotia. And whereas Joanne was held positions of Board of Directors of Barney House, Silent Witness Nova Scotia, the Federation of Community Organizations, and is currently co-chair of the Metro Interagency Committee on Family Violence and members at large of the Public Good Society of Dartmouth, and has received a Holly House Hero Award from the Elizabeth Fry Society for work on the homeless in Halifax Regional Municipality. And in 2010 was awarded the Peter F. Drucker Award for Nonprofit Management in Canada. Therefore, be resolved, all members of this House acknowledge Joanne Bernard's many contributions to our community and to this province. Mr. Speaker, I'd ask for waiver, notice, and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Inverness.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Mary Florence Beaton of Port Hood has received a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Canadian Cancer Society, and whereas over the past 16 years, Mary Florence has exemplified the Cancer Society's mission and has become the face of their organization in her community. And whereas Mary Florence served as the chair of the Canadian Cancer Society's campaign in the Port Hood area for 12 years. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate Mary Florence Beaton on receiving a Lifetime Achievement Award and thank her for her service to the Canadian Cancer Society and her community. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Richmond.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the 2011 Richmond Amateur Baseball Association, RABA, League Championship took place at the Dan Willey Memorial Ballpark in Port Hawkesbury, featuring the Little Lance Hawks, Loosedale Barracos, Pittigraw Redcaps, and the Port Hawkesbury Bucks. Whereas after finishing the regular season in last place, the Loosedale Barracos went undefeated during the weekend tournament and ended the 13-year reign of the Pittigraw Redcaps by taking home their first RABA trophy in 24 years. And whereas Loosedale Barracos team consisted of manager Christian Marchand, coaches Joel Marchand and Jeremy Sampson, along with players Robert McDonald, Michael Digdon, Lee Marchand, Kyle Burns, Jeremy McNeil, Devin Conrad, Nelson Gayesh, Scott Gayesh, Lance Squires, Noel Jeffrey, Adam Cotton, Stephen Campbell, Neil Sampson, Vaughn Cotton, and Josh Marchand. Therefore, be it resolved, the members of the House of Assembly congratulate the Loosedale Barracos on winning the 2011 RABA League Championship and wish them continued success. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Hants West.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Lieutenant Governor's Education Medal recognizes students' academic achievement, leadership, and service to school and community. And whereas in May 2011, Brandon Tupper was awarded this prestigious award by Nova Scotia's Lieutenant Governor, Mayanne E. Francis, for his many achievements, including maintaining his honors and with distinction status throughout junior and senior high school. And whereas Mr. Tupper has been a strong leader on the Avonview High School's varsity volleyball team and has been involved in tennis, men's softball, skiing, and club volleyball outside of school, as well as volunteering with the Progressive Conservative Youth Organization during the past 2 provincial elections. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate Brandon on receiving the Lieutenant Governor's Education Medal and wish him all the best with his future endeavours. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas this week, November 6th until November 12th, is National Pain Awareness Week. And whereas the direct health care costs associated with chronic pain are estimated to be more than $6 billion per year, with indirect costs associated with productivity loss and sick days at $37 billion across Canada. And whereas National Pain Awareness Week is also a time to increase public awareness of pain education and treatment to ensure those who experience legitimate pain are receiving the care and quality of life they deserve. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the House acknowledge this week as National Pain Awareness Week, encourage the Minister of Health and Wellness to recognize the challenges associated with undertreated pain in our society. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice, passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Argyll.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the population of Nova Scotian seniors is rapidly increasing, with the current figures of persons 65 and over standing at 156,000, and predictions projected that by 2025, this number will increase by more than 50%. And whereas on October 2011, an average of 1,624 seniors languish on the waiting list for long-term care beds, and whereas with 200 promised beds yet to be built, this NDP government stopped building long-term care beds, a short-sighted decision that will increase the wait list and put more strain on families and caregivers. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly encourage the NDP government to keep the commitments made in the long-term care strategy so that seniors can get the care that they need in the appropriate setting. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? I hear several noes. The motion is tabled. The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Oh, sorry. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the successive Liberal governments led by Jean Chrétien and Paul Martin left Canada with the largest surpluses in Canadian history and a sound banking system. And whereas the Harper government whittled away at these massive surpluses and ran our country deeper into deficit and debt than we have ever seen. And whereas the Harper government said there would be no recession, failed to balance our books on schedule, and sold Canadians a bill of goods. Therefore, be it resolved that members of the House of Assembly recognize that Conservative governments are not sound managers of the economy, and we cannot trust Harper or Bailey to get us back on track. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
The motion is tabled. The honourable member for Cape Breton North.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future date I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Matthew MacDonald, who was born with Marfan syndrome, and his family will never outgrow their gratitude to the IWK Children's Hospital for years of excellent care. And whereas Matthew held his 11th annual lemonade and cookie sale for the 27th annual IWK telethon and raised $10,000. And whereas Matthew has become a fundraising role model in his community and the province by raising thousands of dollars for the IWK. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate the volunteer efforts of Matthew MacDonald and wish him well in all his endeavours. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Yarmouth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, fellow colleagues. I hereby give notice that on a future day I should move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas from November 3rd to 6th, Molson Canadian Nova Scotia Music Week 2007 was held in Yarmouth, and this exciting event was capped off with an industry awards brunch and the NSLC Gala Awards Show. Whereas Yarmouth's Trevor Murphy of radio station CKDU volunteers his time and energy to music and the arts in the province of Nova Scotia, and whereas CKDU was nominated for three Music Nova Scotia 2011 Industry Awards, including Community Presenter of the Year, Radio Program of the Year, and Radio Station of the Year, and won awards for Community Presenter of the Year and Radio Station of the Year. Therefore, be resolved that the members of this House of Assembly congratulate Yarmouth's Trevor Murphy and CKDU for receiving these prestigious nominations and awards. Thank Trevor Murphy and his colleagues for their important volunteer work and contributions to music in Nova Scotia, and wish Trevor Murphy and CKDU continued success. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future date I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Morgan Gillis of Sydney Forks competed in the Canadian Motorsport Racing Club 2011 Women's Eastern National Series Championship held in St. Julie, Quebec in July, and whereas Morgan drove her YZ 125 Yamaha to second and fourth place finishes in races at the championships, and whereas Morgan's excellent performance earned her second place overall at the competition, therefore be resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate Morgan Gillis on her skill and accomplishment and wish her every success in her future racing events. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Glace Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you, colleagues. Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the member from Dartmouth East, I hereby give notice that on a future day, I should move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas John Burton is the Executive Director of the East Dartmouth Boys and Girls Club in Dartmouth, and whereas Mr. Burton's entry into the Office Learning and Essential Skills Story Contest has been selected for publication, and whereas this collection of stories will be distributed throughout the country to share the success of projects benefiting adult learning in non-traditional settings so that they may be replicated in other communities. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly join me in congratulating Mr. Burton on his achievement and applaud his commitment to community improvement, not only here, but across the country. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Inverness.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Straight Area Transit was in Inverness to officially launch its expanded public transportation service, and whereas with contributions made by East Coast Credit Union and 2 provincial programs and the support of the Straight Highlands RDA, the 17-passenger bus will now provide service to Inverness County communities like Judique, Port Hood, Mabou, and Inverness. And whereas the service will improve the mobility of seniors and students in these communities, allowing them to travel to the Straight area for schooling, shopping, and other needs. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly acknowledge the hard work and dedication by the Straight Area Transit and support them as they continue to expand their service to Inverness County and the surrounding area. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Digby Annapolis.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on August 29, 2011, Coach Terry Ferris presented Brandon Trimper with Digby Soccer's most important award, the Keith Trimper Award. Whereas this award holds a special place in all players' hearts after they lost Keith, a past teammate due to an accident in 2008. Whereas the recipient of this award must show some of the same qualities exemplified by Keith, making this award extra special for Brandon, Keith's brother. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate Brandon Trimper on this most memorable award and wish him continued success in the sport of soccer. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cape Breton North on an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to take this opportunity, excuse me, to introduce my beautiful daughter who couldn't make it last Monday when we were here for the first time due to school commitments, and she's here today. She looks just like her mother, thank God. Huh? And she's here today to watch the proceedings. I'd like to have everybody give her a warm welcome. Thank you.
We welcome all our guests to the gallery and hope you enjoyed today's proceedings. I will now recognize the honourable member for Hants West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future date I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas over 40,000 student athletes participate annually in school sport programs throughout the province. And whereas the Nova Scotia Schools Athletic Federation annually organizes a celebration of school sport to celebrate participation, for fair play and service to school sport, and to reinforce the significant role interscholastic athletes play in education. And whereas Samantha Chambers, a student at Avenue High School in Windsor, was the female recipient of Celebration of School Sport 2010-11 Award for demonstrating respect for others and displaying a true example of good sportsmanship. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate Samantha on receiving this award and wish her all the best. Mr. Speaker, I would request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Colchester North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Ford Motor Company of Canada sponsor a Drive One for Your Community program, and whereas more than 150 area residents test drove a Ford vehicle from Tri-County Ford of Tatamagouche, Colchester North, and whereas Tri-County Ford and Ford of Canada donated more than $3,500 to the North Shore Recreation Centre, therefore be it resolved the Tri-County Ford be commended for their community involvement by supporting the community's well-used recreation centre. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice, passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Victoria the Lakes.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Kidston Island off Bedeck, with its striking lighthouse, is a well-known landmark that attracts visitors from far and near. And whereas the Bedeck Lions Club operates the Kidston Island Ferry that shuttles visitors to and from the island from July 1st to Labor Day, as well as offering the swimming program. And whereas the ferry, the John P. Asa, has a new look due to a significant investment by the Lions Club that makes the trip both safer and more enjoyable. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate the Bedeck Lions Club on their success and thank them for the many things they do for their community. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Kingston Multi-Addiction Centre, known fondly as the MAC Centre, has celebrated 20 years of service to the community in September 2011, and whereas this building, formerly the old North Kingston Schoolhouse, has prospered under the board of directors made up of community and representatives of Alcoholics Anonymous. And whereas the MAC Centre is also used by other community groups for fundraising events and continues to be a valuable part of the entire community, therefore be it resolved that members of the House of Assembly congratulate the Kingston MAC Centre for 20 years of outstanding service to the community. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice, passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Argyll.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future date I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on June 28th, during the graduation exercises at École Secondaire de Panalba, Vincent Muse was awarded the First Nations and Indigenous Black Students Entrance Scholarship from Dalhousie University in the amount of $12,000. And whereas Vincent is an Amiros Hill native and a member of the Eastern Woodland Métis Nation, Nova Scotia. And whereas Vincent was presented the award by Principal Brent Surrett on behalf of the President and Vice Chancellor of Dalhousie University, Tom Travis. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate Vincent Muse on his outstanding academic achievement and wish him continued success and in all his future endeavors. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Yarmouth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on Remembrance Day at the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, Canadians are asked to pause in memory of the thousands of men and women who sacrificed their lives in military service. And whereas members of the Yarmouth's local Royal Canadian Legion Branch 61 work tirelessly to remind our community of the sacrifices endured by all Canadian veterans and service people. And whereas members of the Yarmouth's Royal Canadian Legion Branch 61 continually fulfill the Royal Canadian Legion's long-standing tradition of caring for veterans and their families, our current serving members of the Canadian Forces, and our new veterans with steadfast determination. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House of Assembly recognize and thank the members of Yarmouth's Royal Canadian Legion Branch 61 for their dedication to and enduring care for our veterans, service people, and their families, and for being a constant reminder to all of our community members of the service and sacrifices made for us and our freedom. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and pass without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Digby Annapolis.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on the future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas each year many schools across the province raise funds for cancer research, and Barton Elementary is no exception. Whereas the physical education teacher, Darren Porter, promised the students he would shave his head if they could raise over $2,000. Whereas Barton Elementary surpassed that challenge and raised $2,340, holding Darren Porter to his promise. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate the students of Barton Elementary and Darren Porter in their successful fundraising challenge. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice, passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. It is now 3:02. We will start oral questions put by members to ministers. 3:03, sorry. Thank you. The Honourable Leader, the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Premier. Yesterday, APEC downgraded the projections for the Nova Scotia economy. Mr. Speaker, it's not hard to figure out why when you consider Nova Scotia has some of the highest taxes in the entire country. Mr. Speaker, today we've learned that the Nova Scotia economy is the slowest growth of all the provinces in Canada at 1.9%. Yet the Premier insists on pushing his labour agenda at the expense of the economy. So my question to the Premier is, why is the Premier asking for feedback on first contract arbitration instead of working with the businesses to create good jobs for Nova Scotians?
Honourable the Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we are in fact working with businesses from one end of the province to the other to create a positive atmosphere for growth in the province. But unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, you know, after 20 years of the worst economic performance as a result of governments of both of those parties, it's a big hill to climb up.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are losing jobs every day in Nova Scotia. We all know the difficulties that are happening in the Strait area, and of course the news that was brought to this House last week and from the Queens County and the entire South Shore. Mr. Speaker, today we've learned that Composite Atlantic will be laying off 37 workers. Also, over the past year, 5,000 people have left the workforce, and the Premier is pushing forward first contract arbitration legislation which will impact every non-union business in Nova Scotia. So my question to the Speaker, Mr. Speaker, with a stagnant economy, why is the Premier talking about first contract arbitration legislation when he knows it will undermine business confidence and future investment in Nova Scotia?
Honourable the Premier.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just to correct the Leader of the Opposition, first contract legislation does not, in fact, affect non-union businesses. It has no impact on them whatsoever. Mr. Speaker, what we're doing to build confidence in the business community is we're going out and we're ensuring that we win contracts like the Ship Start Here National Ship Procurement Strategy, Mr. Speaker. We're signing agreements with Newfoundland and Labrador to build the Lower Churchill project, Mr. Speaker. And so we're supporting good projects like the new convention center in Halifax, Mr. Speaker. Those are the things that build an economy.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on his final supplementary.
Let me begin. The good jobs of the Labrador Hydro in Newfoundland. The project he talks about in downtown Halifax has not been announced to be convention center. We're looking for that to be announced at some day down the road, Mr. Speaker. And furthermore, Mr. Speaker, I think Irving deserves a little bit of credit for the Mr. Speaker, let me correct the Premier. He stood in this House and said first contract arbitration does not affect non-union employees when he knows full well, and every union leader knows full well, it makes it easier to unionize non-union workplaces in this province, and that's what's behind it. Mr. Speaker, first contract arbitration is payback to union leaders in this province. Businesses are faced with soaring costs, and they're being forced to make tough decisions on how they can keep their businesses going, Mr. Speaker. With a stagnant economy, soaring costs, and Nova Scotians facing the prospect of losing their job, why is the Premier more concerned about paying back union leadership instead of trying to find good-paying jobs for Nova Scotians?
Honourable the Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm not concerned about the rhetoric of the Leader of the Opposition. What we are focused on is making sure that we take the greatest possible advantage of the assets that we have, the great research and development capacities of our universities, the young people who will invest in education and get skilled trades jobs, Mr. Speaker. We're interested in working with employers like Irving, and I want to specifically say, Mr. Speaker, we're very proud to have worked with Irving to ensure that they were able to compete and win the National Shipbuilding Procurement Strategy, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this week the Toronto Dominion Bank tells us that the shipyard opportunity will result in 3,200 new jobs for Nova Scotians. Sadly, the fact of the matter is that in the last year alone, in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia has lost 2,100 jobs. In southwest Nova Scotia, we've lost 2,500 jobs in our province, Mr. Speaker, a total of 4,600 in those two regions alone, far outweighing the opportunity of the shipyard contract. I have a simple question for the Premier, Mr. Speaker. Does the Premier agree that maintaining current jobs is as important as receiving new ones?
Honourable the Premier.
Well, of course, Mr. Speaker, job retention is just as important as job recruitment. That's a certainty. But, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to point out that in Nova Scotia we have the lowest unemployment rate in the region, and lower than when the Leader of the Conservative Party was the Chief of Staff for the former Conservative government.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, it's pretty sad when the Premier is proud of the fact that our labour force has actually shrunk because his government and its policies have driven so many Nova Scotians completely out of our province. However, I am glad that he at least acknowledges that maintaining current jobs is as important as receiving new ones, given that Surely, Mr. Speaker, we can all agree that schemes like first contract arbitration are coming in at exactly the wrong time when our economy is as weak as it is, when we have a great opportunity to send a positive signal to the rest of the country that this is a place where jobs can be created, where businesses can grow. His government actually wants to tell people this is the wrong place to invest. And so my question to the Premier is this: in light of these job losses, will he agree at least that now is not the time to proceed with his job-killing first contract arbitration bill?
Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, first contract legislation exists right across the country. It was introduced in various jurisdictions by Conservative governments, by Liberal governments, by NDP governments, Mr. Speaker. And all of those, I don't think the Leader of the Conservative Party would suggest that all of those jurisdictions, whether they were Conservative or Liberal or whatever they were trying to kill jobs, Mr. Speaker. They were trying to create stability for both employers and employees, and that's why it's a reasonable thing, Mr. Speaker, to consider. What we are concentrating on, Mr. Speaker, is making sure that we are taking best advantage of the assets of the province. We are improving, Mr. Speaker, the programs like productivity incentive programs in order to make sure that our manufacturing industry keeps pace with the most modern technology and therefore is actually able to compete in a global market that's in a downturn, Mr. Speaker. That's forward-looking policy.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, bad ideas may exist in other places, but that is no excuse for bringing them here at a time when we can least afford it. Mr. Speaker, a few years ago in this House, all parties supported the Environmental Goals and Sustainable Prosperity Act, which integrated the desire to grow our economy and create jobs with the wish that we all have for a greener, more green economy. This is something that had all party support, but the NDP changed when they got into office, Mr. Speaker. Now they have thrown that balance completely out of whack and are telling Nova Scotians to pay the bill with their bite-the-bullet electricity plan. At a time when Nova Scotia needs to attract jobs and send a signal that we're open for business, Mr. Speaker, the NDP are taking us in the wrong direction. My question to the Premier is this: will he admit that bite-the-bullet electricity plans are another way, along with first contract arbitration, to put jobs at risk just when we need them the most?
Honourable the Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I have no idea what the Leader of the Conservative Party means by that, but if he means unshackling the economy of this province from the fossil fuel markets, you're darn right we're going to do it.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It seems that the Premier is content to remain silent on the current power rate increase in front of the URB. He's refused to order a performance value audit of Nova Scotia Power operation. Now he says, Mr. Speaker, there's too much paperwork for the people at Nova Scotia Power. The priority of the Premier should not be how much paperwork Nova Scotia Power is doing. His priority should be the power rates that Nova Scotia is being forced to pay. Nova Scotia Power has taken $121 million out of this province last year. They're on pace to take $122.3 million out this year, Mr. Speaker, and I might add it was announced they are well ahead of record profits in the third quarter this year. So my question to the Premier is, will he finally oppose this rate increase in front of the URB?
Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, of course we have made our thoughts on the power situation known, Mr. Speaker. But what we fundamentally need to do in this province is change the power equation. You know, I know the Leader of the Opposition wants studies and he wants audits and he wants all kinds of paperwork done, but that's going to get the province nowhere, Mr. Speaker. What we need to do is ensure that we have a program that gets us off of fossil fuels and on to renewables, which will give us a stable electricity rate environment.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on his first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, while we're waiting for stable energy prices, the Premier is allowing Nova Scotian Power to run roughshod over the rate base in Nova Scotia, and instead of demanding that company do like every other business in this province has done, has looked internally for savings. Mr. Speaker, there's not a single member of this House who is opposed to renewable energy. What we're opposed to, Mr. Speaker, is the Premier sitting silently by while Nova Scotia Power continually goes back to the rate base looking for more and more money. Small business in this province has said their biggest concern is the power rates being faced by their operations. So my question to the Premier, why will the Premier continually ignore the concerns of small business in this province?
Honourable the Premier.
I don't ignore them at all, Mr. Speaker, but I think the Leader of the Opposition just missed the comments of the Leader of the Conservative Party with respect to renewable energy. Mr. Speaker, for small business, we understand that everything is price sensitive, is cost sensitive for them. So, Mr. Speaker, that's why we reduced the small business tax by 20%.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on his final supplementary.
Speaker, I would suggest that the Premier stop listening to the Leader of the Conservative Party and start listening to the ratepayers in the province of Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, the Premier has ordered massive cuts to health care and education in this province. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Health has ordered the district health authorities to find those cuts inside of their organizations. The Minister of Education has ordered provincial school boards to find those cuts inside of their organizations. Yet the Premier refuses to order Nova Scotia Power to find the savings in the company's operations. My question to the Premier, why is the NDP government prepared to go after students and patients with deep cuts, but unwilling to go after Nova Scotia Power executives?
Honourable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't know where to start with that much untruth in there, Mr. Speaker. For example, Mr. Speaker, our contribution to students last year was the largest single investment in post-secondary education since the advent of the student loan program, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, what we're trying to do is ensure that there is a stable environment. Well, Mr. Speaker, he doesn't seem to want to hear my answer. He asked a question. Mr. Speaker, the reality is that the Utility and Review Board is an independent organization that does a thorough review, looks at all the things that he suggests are supposed to look at. So the question I would have is, does the Leader of the Opposition believe that it is the job of the government to politically interfere in an independent review tribunal?
The Honourable Member for Richmond.
Mr. Speaker, last week the Premier was asked if he was opposed to downloading of costs to Nova Scotia due to the federal Harper government's Justice Bill C-10. The Premier stated at the time that he hoped that the federal government would pay for any extra costs to the province. Mr. Speaker, this is becoming more and more unlikely to happen. Ontario, Quebec and Newfoundland have come out and said that they reject the download of these increased costs to their provinces and the extra demands it would place on their justice systems. My question to the Premier is, will the Premier come out and oppose the downloading of these increased costs onto our province by the federal Harper government?
Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I've already said, both in this House and publicly, that if there are increased costs as a result of Bill C-10, that burden should not be borne by the Nova Scotia taxpayers, that the federal government should fund any increases in cost.
The Honourable Member for Richmond on his first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's very clear in Ontario, Quebec and Newfoundland where their government stands. They've been very public in doing so, whereas our Premier seems to be more hopeful rather than coming out and standing up for Nova Scotians. Mr. Speaker, this crime bill could have significant cost to Nova Scotia and significant impact on our justice system. Parliamentary Budget Office estimates that the provinces will be faced with costs of between $6 billion and $10 billion over the next 5 years. The Prime Minister has indicated that assistance to the provinces is highly unlikely, and reports from federal justice officials only seem to validate the estimation that the provinces will have to shoulder these costs alone. Mr. Speaker, with the province already suffering from NDP cuts, how does the Premier plan to pay for the federal Conservatives' crime bill?
Honourable the Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as the member would know, we are coming up to the new negotiations for transfers for the provinces. This is something that's being addressed by the Council of the Federation. I can assure the member opposite that we take into account all of the programming that the federal government undertakes when we look at the questions of the envelopes of funding in the transfer program. So, Mr. Speaker, that will form part of what we will do as those negotiations go forward. And of course, we're raising our objections, as we have already said, with the federal government.
The honourable member for Richmond on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I would certainly hope that if the Premier is going to Ottawa with his colleagues to fight for more money for the provinces, that's for things such as infrastructure, healthcare and education, and not for jails here in our province, because that's certainly not the priority of Nova Scotians. Mr. Speaker, again, this is a significant cost that could not only face our province, but certainly put an additional burden onto the justice system of our province. Being that the Premier has indicated he will soon be going to visit the federal government, would he indicate whether he's going to bring these concerns directly to Ottawa, that Nova Scotia does not want to see any of the costs of Bill C-10 downloaded onto our province?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I already have.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today's Statistics Canada reports that Nova Scotia has this year the second lowest economic growth, the second lowest growth in GDP in all of Canada, second only to Nunavut. Now is not the time to bring forward schemes like first contract arbitration and bite the bullet electricity plans. My question to the Premier is this: will he put jobs and the economy first now, ahead of the special interests who are pushing them on these two useless schemes?
Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, you know, since June of 2009, this government launched the Jobs Here program, Mr. Speaker. It was the first real economic development plan in this province for 20 years, Mr. Speaker. It was designed through consultations with the businesses of this province. It was designed for them so that they would be able to best take advantage of the program, Mr. Speaker. It's a good program, and it's one endorsed by the business community.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the only business community that's going to endorse that Premier's plan is the business community in Fort McMurray, who are the true beneficiaries of what he is trying to do. Mr. Speaker, today Statistics Canada tells us that Nova Scotia, in addition to having the second slowest rate of economic growth, has the dubious distinction of matching that with the second highest rate of inflation at 3.8%. More proof that now is not the time for first contract arbitration and bite the bullet electricity plans. My question is, will the Premier commit now to stopping first contract arbitration in its tracks, to stopping bite the bullet electricity plans in their tracks, and truly help out Nova Scotia families that have to pay those higher costs?
Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, what we did is we are working to roll back what was 20 years of the worst economic performance in this province, perpetrated by the former government that the leader of the Conservative Party was the Chief of Staff, and of course the former Liberal government in this province. Mr. Speaker, that is what we have to do. And Mr. Speaker, we know, as most people know, that this is a very difficult time in the world's economic history, and that there are some things that are, of course, beyond the control of a small province to control. But what we are doing, Mr. Speaker, is investing in ensuring that our young people are going to be able to meet the challenges of the new economy.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party on his final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Premier may point to difficult global economic times, but the fact of the matter is, it is his government, it was his decision to raise the HST, to increase taxes in Nova Scotia. No one else deserves the blame for that. And today, Nova Scotians, each and every one of us, is paying $650 more per person because of his tax policies. More proof, Mr. Speaker, still more proof that now is not the time for schemes like first contract arbitration and for bite the bullet electricity plans. My question for the Premier is this: will he admit, in light of all of this evidence, that his policies are digging our province into a hole so deep that we'll never see when those ships come in.
The Honourable the Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, what I know is that thanks to this government, we have the lowest business taxes in this province in the last 20 years, Mr. Speaker. Lowest business taxes in the last 20 years.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question will be for the Minister of Finance. Last week, I had the opportunity to question the Minister on what it is going to take for him to adjust his economic growth targets for this province. Just yesterday, the Atlantic Province's Economic Council downgraded their growth forecast for Nova Scotia to 1% and 1.2% respectively for this year and next. The province still insists on maintaining a 1.9% growth target for this year, and this is an error that could cost Nova Scotians millions of dollars, in fact hundreds of millions, when our budget doesn't come in on as planned. My question to the Minister is, will the Minister of Finance wake up? When will the Minister of Finance wake up to the economic realities around him and revisit the growth forecasts?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The member has asked the same question that she asked last week, and the answer, of course, is the same. We will be issuing a forecast update before the end of December.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park on her first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, only today the Federal Finance Minister announced he will be revising federal government forecasts. The province of Ontario has announced that they are revising their growth targets. The two largest governments then in this country are revising their plans now, yet in Nova Scotia the Finance Minister seems quite comfortable to just go steady as she goes, hoping for the best and hoping the worst doesn't happen. Mr. Speaker, my question to the Minister is, why is the Finance Minister continuing to govern our economy with his eyes closed and his head in the sand? Why wait till the end of December?
Honourable the Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, Mr. Speaker, it strikes me that when one is the Finance Minister during a recession, that steady as she goes is not a bad philosophy, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when this government develops a forecast of economic growth, we take into account a wide variety of factors, including all of the forecasts that are available from the private sector. Those forecasts are coming in, Mr. Speaker. They're not all available yet, but when we have them all in and we are ready to change our forecast, if indeed that is a conclusion that we come to, Mr. Speaker, we will make sure that the people of Nova Scotia are the first to know.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park on her final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I think the Finance Minister fails to realize that just going with the status quo and taking your time and not responding to the best information that's available now and has been released now is putting us in jeopardy, because the government leaves themselves less and less time to adjust their plans and their spending to the realities of the marketplace. Mr. Speaker, we now have the federal government, the Parliamentary Budget Officer, the Bank of Canada, the Government of Ontario, the OECD, and our private banks, the Bank of Montreal, Scotia Capital, RBC Economics, as well as the Atlantic Province's Economic Council, adjusting their growth forecast for Nova Scotia downward. My question to the Minister is, Mr. Speaker, is what will it take for this Minister to react to the changing economic conditions and update his growth targets to reflect changing economic realities?
Honourable the Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I will, as I said, I will release a budget forecast update before the end of December. It will incorporate all of the latest economic information. We will consider all forecasts from the public and private sector, including the APEC and TD forecasts that came out yesterday. I do anticipate that the province's economic forecast for 2011 and 2012 will be revised from budget day, and it is becoming more likely as time goes on and more forecasts come in that our forecast will follow the same trend that we are seeing elsewhere.
The Honourable Member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question through you is to the Minister of Education. Mr. Speaker, in 2006, the Middle River School was ranked as one of the top 30 schools in Canada by Today's Parents magazine. The school employs a multi-age teaching approach in which students receive unparalleled one-on-one attention from teachers, and they're exposed to extraordinary learning opportunities often impossible in larger schools. Mr. Speaker, Middle River School has a strong community support with a dedicated staff and committed parents. But with only 23 students this year, its future is unsure. The Middle River School Review Committee is hosting a community meeting this week to solicit feedback about the school's future. So, Mr. Speaker, my question through you to the Minister is, what has the Minister done to prove she's committed to giving small rural schools a fighting chance when up for review by the school board?
The Honourable, the Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the honourable member for bringing this issue forward. We have definitely challenges in Nova Scotia with declining enrollment, and it's unfortunate that some of our schools have lost so many students. Last session, I did bring up on the floor of this honourable house that we needed to look at the funding formula differently because we have different challenges, and the formula hadn't been looked at for over 14 years. So we are reviewing the formula, and I think that this will definitely answer some questions for our small and isolated school, and the formula will be as we move forward with the formula that we are reviewing right now. I know that's not answering the honourable member's question, but it is one commitment that we are moving forward with to recognize the needs of our very small and isolated schools in the province. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Victoria Lakes on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, one of the sticking points for Middle River School Review Committee is the uncertainty as to whether or not the Minister is reviewing the grants program for small rural schools implemented under the HOG formula. So my question through you to the Minister is, has the Minister put the small schools grant program on the government's agenda for review?
Honourable the Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Yes, we are looking at the HOG formula, the revision around that. We are looking at the issue of our small and isolated schools, and we are in the review process right now. And I just want to say that no decisions have been made. Nothing's final at this time. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Victoria Lakes on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the government continues to hide behind arm's-length boards and authorities. It lacks leadership and is continually passing the blame for cuts to frontline services it faces. Mr. Speaker, will the Minister commit to ensuring school boards take every measure to cut administrative waste and not teachers, teaching assistants, math mentors, and small, thriving rural schools like Middle River and school programs that work?
Honourable the Minister of Education.
Thank you very much. I guess I did pass that mandate out and under our last budget considerations. We are to make sure that all of the resources are in our classrooms. I just want to say that school reviews are very stressful for communities, and I want to recognize that, Mr. Speaker, that during this time with the declining enrollment, we do recognize, and the Department of Education recognizes the stress that communities are under as the school board performs these reviews. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Digby Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is also for the Minister of Education. Mr. Speaker, last week I asked the Minister to support the people of Weymouth and help them keep their elementary school open. The Minister said that she's only involved in reviewing the board's school closure process. Well, Mr. Speaker, the process in my constituency seems to be broken. What will it take for the Minister to review the Weymouth school closure recommendations?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I leave the review process in the hands of the school board, and if there are any issues that the honourable member would like to bring to me, I would be more than willing to meet with him over those. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Digby Annapolis on his first supplementary.
Well, there is an issue, Mr. Speaker, and Mr. Speaker, the closure of Weymouth School needs to be reviewed, especially since Barton Consolidated, that's next to it or a few miles from it, is also being recommended for closure. Mr. Speaker, the two school reviews are connected. The impact state assessment report for Barton Consolidated, another school slated for closure, will have 50% of its students bused to the Weymouth School. My question to the minister is, if Weymouth Consolidated School closes, where are the Barton School students going to go if they lose their school in Weymouth?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And the honourable member will know that I won't be able to answer that question on the floor here this afternoon. But I just want to also remind the honourable member that the community does have there's two places within the process that the community has to address these situations with the school board to find those answers. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Digby Annapolis on his final supplementary.
It's confusing to the people down there, Mr. Speaker. I mean, they're both recommendations. They're both saying close the schools, but one recommendation is saying to send them to the other school that's closing. So what is what? Is they both going to close? Is one going to close? People are confused, and I think that's why they want the minister to look into this situation. Mr. Speaker, the issue that the minister seems to be more worried about balancing the books is not standing up for the community schools. Even when a board makes the ridiculous recommendation to bus students to a school slated for closure, this minister seems to refuse to get involved. Mr. Speaker, when will the minister finally stand up for the students and parents of Barton and Weymouth Elementary School and find another way to try to balance the books of this problem?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I just want to remind the honourable member that it is not my place to be involved in the review process. This is a process that is ongoing. There's been no decisions made at this time. The honourable member can speak to me at some time, and I will definitely go over concerns and try to alleviate the stresses in that community. However, I must say that this is a process. It is a process that's very clearly has its regulations associated with it. And the members of the community have the opportunity to address their concerns on two different occasions through this process to the school board. But again, I would just like to repeat that I would be more than happy to meet with the member opposite. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, my question through you will be for the Premier. First, I would like to thank the Premier for raising the awareness about the concerns surrounding the abandoned MV miner stranded off of Scattery Island in Cape Breton. This issue is of serious concern for me and my constituents because this ship is only about a half a kilometre away from a scallop fishery and is in an area where lobster traps are found and planted in a regular during the season. Mr. Speaker, my question to the Premier is this. I know that certain hazardous material has been removed from the ship, such as fire extinguishers, transformers, and light fixtures. Has there been any asbestos found, and if so, what is the government's plan to have it removed?
Honourable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, we had done an analysis of what actually existed on the vessel, and as I understand it, there are what is called asbestos-laden material. So, in other words, some of the materials that were used, likely on the inside of the vessel, either in the walls or in the deck walls, perhaps insulation in some of the compartments may contain asbestos. What we did is we contracted to do the cleanup that needed to be done and could be done given the weather window that existed and that on which we could agree to have funded. So, Mr. Speaker, that's what's been done to date.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton West on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I had the opportunity to go out 2 weeks ago and have a look at this ship, and at that time there was a large hole in the side of the bulk carrier. And since then, with the weather that's taken place, that hole has gone through and it's through on the other side. And Mr. Speaker, I've been told that there is asbestos on that ship. And as a matter of fact, on October the 13th, the Premier said, and I quote, he wants Ottawa to deal with further environmental cleanup of this vessel, which, he said, contains some asbestos-laden material and a transformer containing PCBs. Now, Mr. Speaker, the question is, what are we going to do about this? Because we know that if this ship is disintegrating, it's falling apart, that asbestos is going into the water. Is it being digested by the sea life? What happens if that asbestos comes ashore, dries out, and becomes airborne? So, Mr. Speaker, my question through you to the Premier is this. Can the Premier provide concrete evidence that this asbestos on the ship will not create a hazard? And if he can't, will he give the House an undertaking to have this matter addressed as soon as possible?
Honourable the Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, he just reiterated, I think, all the things that I just said in that question. Of course, we are undertaking to ensure that the environmental cleanup with respect to the MV Minor is done in as expeditious a fashion as possible. And of course, we are also trying to ensure that the companies and the jurisdictions that have responsibility for that cleanup take that responsibility and that it doesn't rest on the shoulders of the taxpayers, the people of Nova Scotia.
The honourable member for Cape Breton West on his final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on October the 7th, the Canadian Press reported, and I quote, Dexter said he would make sure the stricken vessel is quickly removed if the current salvage operation gets bogged down. Only 5 days later, in the Canadian Press, he reported they reported that the Premier said the province was now considering removing the contaminants and ultimately the ship itself. And I will table both of those articles. Mr. Speaker, that was a month ago. My final question through you to the Premier is this. Will the Premier commit to removing this ship before the end of the year and making sure it does not harm our local fishery?
Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, there's no question that the best time to remove that ship would have been when it first foundered on the rocks. Unfortunately, neither the company that was towing it nor the Federal Department of Transport had either the means or the regulatory ability to make that happen. The result is that the ship has continued to deteriorate in terms of its physical structure, and that is causing greater and greater trouble. I'm sure the member understands that we're now into the time of year which makes the further removal of it not impossible but much more difficult and certainly much more dangerous. So, Mr. Speaker, we are working on all of these things at the same time: the environmental cleanup, the safety of the wreck, and trying to make sure that the people who cause the harm to the province are the people who pay for it.
The honourable member for Colchester North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question through you is to the Minister of Education. The Minister has stated in this House that the student-teacher ratio in the province of Nova Scotia is 13 students per 1 teacher. What most people don't understand, Mr. Speaker, what does that really mean? How is that calculated? What the Minister needs to do is to explain to this House and to all Nova Scotians what numbers are used to calculate that ratio. So my question to the Minister is this. Will the Minister explain how the ratio of 13 students per 1 teacher is calculated?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. That's calculated by how much money is provided to these school boards for their teaching allocation. And I just would like to say that the member is right. That is confusing to people. That's 13 to 1 in the calculations. It does not necessarily mean 1 teacher per classroom. That's the allocations of staff in schools. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Colchester North on her first supplementary.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. The question had nothing to do with money provided to school boards. It had to do with the ratio of students to teachers. So I'm not sure if the minister is unwilling or unable to explain to this House how that calculation takes place. We have teachers, Mr. Speaker, who are administrators, resource teachers, registrars, principals, vice principals, student services staff, consultants, program specialists, and many more, who do not register a class and who do not provide direct instruction to students. Yet, Mr. Speaker, they are included when that student-teacher ratio is calculated. So my question to the minister is this: how many teachers in our public schools are providing direct instruction to students in classrooms?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you very much for the question. As the honourable member knows, we're in the process now of getting all of that information from the school board, but as soon as I have that information, I will provide that to her. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Colchester North on her final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That information is available in every school in this province. And I would suggest, Mr. Speaker, that before we start bragging about a 13-to-1 ratio, we have the numbers, and it sounds like the minister does not. So if the minister wants to show the reality of Nova Scotia schools, she needs to look at the real numbers and then calculate the student-teacher ratio. So, Mr. Speaker, my question is this: will the minister commit to tabling in this House today the real numbers of student-teacher ratio based on real classroom numbers?
The Honourable the Minister of Education.
Thank you very much. And as I said in my last answer, that we do not have all of the information to the department from all of the school boards on all of the classes. I will say, Mr. Speaker, that as soon as I have all of that data in a spreadsheet, definitely I will be tabling it at the House. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Richmond.
Mr. Speaker, roads continue to be a major concern in Nova Scotia. The NDP government chose to cut funding through the Rural Impact Mitigation Fund and Department of Transportation by 50% this summer. Mr. Speaker, now we hear from concerned citizens that winter road maintenance will be cut this year as well, putting Nova Scotian roads at risk. Speaker, I recently met with constituents in Forshoe and Framboise who fear that snow removal equipment in Grand River will be cut along with service to their communities. Mr. Speaker, cutting maintenance to these roads in the most treacherous season is not what Nova Scotians want or deserve from their government. Now, my question to the Minister of Transportation is: why is the NDP government making cuts to winter road maintenance in Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation Infrastructure Renewal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for the question opposite, although I don't appreciate the tone necessarily. You know, as we prepare for the long winter ahead and the difficulties, of course, of financially meeting commitments, whether it's ice control or whether, of course, it's snow removal, one of the obligations of this department and senior staff has been to review snowplow routes, as it should be. There are snowplow routes across this province, some that go a mere 2 kilometers to others that go 80 kilometers. And therefore, the department has gone and reviewed this through a committee process. I know that there have been some concerns expressed. Those particular concerns should be addressed locally through the OS on the site, and there have been no final decisions made. However, let's be clear on one thing. There's a standard that has been determined in this province when it comes to snow removal. That standard will not decline because of a couple of changes that are being made. I think it's important as elected members, we look at the routes, we look at the changes, we get back to the department directly, and let's not get involved in alarmist features that we're going to have snowplow problems all across the province. That is just not going to be the case.
The Honourable Member for Richmond on his first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we learned last week that the government of New Brunswick is making $4 million worth of cuts to winter road maintenance. However, here in Nova Scotia, the NDP government is keeping their cuts to winter maintenance budget a secret. Today is the first day the minister has even acknowledged that such a review is even taking place. But we do know that a review is underway that is being held without the public's knowledge. This was confirmed by a transportation spokesperson that discussions on, quote, ways to improve plowing efficiency are taking place provincially, that everything is on the table, and there will not likely be a formal consultation process with the public, end quote. So, Mr. Speaker, with all due respect to the Minister, how can Nova Scotians raise concerns about changes to plowing when they're not even aware that this review is taking place? Mr. Speaker, my question to the Minister is why is his government keeping its review of winter road maintenance hidden from the public of Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation Infrastructure Renewal.
Well, secrecy is not the issue of this particular department. You know, there are people across the province who are aware that they've been coming to your office about the concerns. And as a conscientious MLA, which you are, as other members present, it's important that you bring them to my attention so that we can deal with them. I think it's very important that we consult with the MLA, that we consult with the operational supervisor, that we consult with the people who are out making the runs in these dangerous situations night after night and day after day. I believe that individual Nova Scotians will understand the fact that if we can save some dollars appropriately, particularly when it comes to the use of salt, I think if we, and I had a great opportunity yesterday to meet with one of the area managers for an extended period of time. It only takes 3.5 hours to get down to the member from Argyle's riding back and forth twice. I can assure you that we had the occasion to look at ice control and the ice problem and the use of salt. That is going to be the #1 way that we're going to come in under budget, and we're going to make sure that we continue to offer the standard which is Nova Scotians are used to when it comes to snow removal. Whether they live in rural parts of Cape Breton or they live in Timberley Prospect, the snow removal in this province will not suffer because of this review of the routes of snow plows at this time.
The Honourable Member for Richmond on his final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the residents of Framboise and Forshoe learned about potential cuts to their services because someone within the Department of Transportation leaked that information to them. There was no means for the public to be aware that this review was taking place. There was no notice that came out from the Department of Transportation that such a review would take place, which would have allowed constituents to come to their MLAs and express concerns. That's not the way this was done, and the Minister knows full well that his members and the staff throughout the province were not to discuss this, and were told not to discuss the review taking place. Nova Scotians expect that their roads are going to be safe and that their roads are going to be maintained during the winter. After hearing of the cuts taking place in New Brunswick, Nova Scotians are left to wonder, is this government similarly going to make cuts here? And they're also asking, are cuts being made to winter maintenance in order to pay for the expensive chip sealing and paving program undertaken by this government? So my final supplementary, Mr. Speaker, is will the Minister confirm whether or not there will be equipment or staff cuts as a result of the secret review to winter maintenance being undertaken in his department?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation Infrastructure Renewal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, that alarmist response is not the way to assure Nova Scotians that the quality snowplow removal will continue in this province, Mr. Speaker. I think it's important, of course, to realize that the member is now aware of some concerns that he has from his constituents. Bringing it up on the floor of the House is not the way to solve it. Coming to my office, in the corner office over there in the Johnson's building, you're welcome to come over at any time. The problem comes back to the fact what they do in New Brunswick is not something we're going to do in Nova Scotia.
The Honourable Member for Argyle.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In an effort to balance his budget, the Premier, together with the Department of Health and Wellness, announced that they'd be encouraging the district health authorities to find a 3% reduction in their budgets this year while having no impact whatsoever on patient care. Executives from the health authorities have spoken out on a number of occasions about the likelihood that such a cut will impact patient care. On this topic, the government has remained relatively silent, while it appears they have offered little assistance beyond suggesting that health authorities find efficiencies or streamline services. So my question through you to the Premier, I'd like to address the elephant that's in the room. Does streamlining services really mean that this government is entertaining the notion of fewer health authorities, cutting down on the number of CEOs, there's 10 of them, or the 72 vice presidents that are around the province? Is that on the table?
The Honourable the Premier.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. What we have been doing, of course, is focusing on those areas where the district health authorities are best able to constrain the increase in their budgets without affecting the quality of patient care, Mr. Speaker. Of course, Mr. Speaker, I, like probably everyone else in this province, remember when there were 4 health boards in the province and that the Conservative Party ran on a platform to increase it to its current number.
The honourable member for Argyll on his first supplementary.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. You know, Nova Scotians want a responsive healthcare system, but it seems that the department is being very quiet on this topic. My question to the Premier, why hasn't the government provided support to health authorities in finding savings that they expect, instead of taking the hands-off approach and to try to avoid any backlash from voters?
Honourable the Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we have, in fact, assisted the district health authorities. We've been working with them, helping them work through their budgets, making it clear to them that what we want to ensure happens is that the quality of patient care does not suffer.
Hear, hear. Honourable member for Argyll on his final supplementary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And quite simply, when will this government unveil their plan of action with the health authorities that will be collapsing the number of DHAs and give Nova Scotians some peace of mind?
Honourable the Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure if he's calling for the elimination of DHAs, but Mr. Speaker, the reason why we have the number of district health authorities in this province that we have is because the Conservative Party, Progressive Conservative Party of Nova Scotia, created them.
The honourable member for Richmond.
Mr. Speaker, last week we learned that 3 executives from Cook Aquaculture have been charged by the Federal Department of Environment for use of an illegal pesticide that killed numerous lobsters in the Bay of Fundy between November 2009 and November 2010. Speaker, while these charges have yet to be proven, they are serious in nature and a concern for Nova Scotia fishermen and conservationists alike. My question to Minister of Fisheries and Aquaculture is his department aware of the situation, and what discussions has the Minister had with the Federal Department of Environment on this matter?
The honourable member, the honourable Minister of Fisheries.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And first of all, I want to congratulate the member opposite for his new role in the critic area. But I do, first of all, I want to recognize the question. This is a very serious question, and very familiar with this particular situation. I can assure the member opposite that this is an investigation that's been ongoing for 2 years now in New Brunswick, and we take this issue very seriously. And I can tell you, as aquaculture, we're very confident that it can be done in Nova Scotia in a sustainable manner. Thank you very much for the question.
The honourable member for Richmond on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the Minister's kind comments. And as I said, very big boots to fill to replace the member for Digby Annapolis as the fisheries critic for our caucus, but I'll certainly do my best. Mr. Speaker, we've had a long history of aquaculture in Nova Scotia that has been safe and sustainable and has played a large role in the economic development of our province. Needs to say, this news is unsettling, not only to everyone involved in the industry, but to all Nova Scotians. Would the Minister inform this House of what types of safeguards have been put in place or will now be put in place to ensure that this type of incident does not occur here in Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister of Fisheries.
Again, I want to thank the member opposite for this particular question. This particular case is before the courts, and it's simply limited what I can speak about this particular case, but I want to assure the member opposite that aquaculture in Nova Scotia is one of the most strict regulated sectors there is, and we pay attention to that. In the decisions that I have made dealing with approvals, that we're there to protect the environment, protect the traditional fisheries, and we'll continue doing this, and we'll continue to monitor this case. Thank you.
The honourable member for Richmond on his final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And clearly our caucus is very supportive of the aquaculture industry and has been for many years, as well as Nova Scotians, and we've seen the benefits that it has brought to our economy and to a sustainable fishery here in the province. This company is one that has a terrific reputation, and needs to say it was alarming to see these charges brought forward. So my final supplementary again is the Minister of Fisheries looking at putting additional safeguards in place in Nova Scotia now that these charges have been laid to ensure that this type of incident will not occur in our province?
The Honourable Minister of Fisheries.
To the member opposite, Mr. Speaker, this minister has already addressed them issues. I asked him to review some of the conditions that I have approved. I have set that out very strict guidelines dealing with any topic such as this. I just want to ensure that in the past 10 years there has not been a treated for sea lice on salmon farms in Nova Scotia. We do not have this issue here at the present. I'm very aware of the issue. This is a serious situation, and we'll continue to monitor it, and we'll also continue anytime there is a approval, we'll take the best interest of the environment and the traditional fisheries. Thank you for the question.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Natural Resources. This summer, Mr. Speaker, under cloak of darkness, officials of the Minister's Department removed the steps leading to the Joggins Beach. Mr. Speaker, those steps are important to the area of Joggins, both as an important piece of tourism infrastructure and they're important for public safety. Mr. Speaker, a few days ago I tabled in this House a petition signed by 621 area residents calling on the government to replace those lost steps. I just want to point out, Mr. Speaker, that is more than the entire population of the immediate area of Joggins. The minister has said publicly that the steps were removed after consultation with the residents of the Joggins area, which seems odd since more than everybody signed that petition. And so my question to the minister, Mr. Speaker, is who did he consult with before removing the Joggins steps? And will he table any correspondence that he has from any single individual asking his department to take away those steps from the people of Joggins?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I had the great privilege of being in Cumberland County yesterday with the honourable member, and it was great to get back to that area of our province. And it was in the Parslow area, but not that far from Joggins, really. So it's the Joggins, the park up there is a beautiful park, and the decisions were made there in the best interest of residents, and for safety reasons, that decision was made.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In addition to suggesting that there had been some consultation, the minister and his department say that the current landowner upon which those steps rest didn't want to have the steps on his property anymore. But, Mr. Speaker, everyone in the area knows that is not the case. So I asked the minister, will he table any evidence he has that there was truly some discussion with the landowner in that regard? And if it turns out it didn't happen after all, like the people of Joggins know, will he commit to putting those steps back where they belong?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Certainly safety is the primary concern here, and nothing overrides or overrules